Great to have you with us for another live Action for Happiness event. My name is Mark Williamson, and I'm so pleased to be welcoming you to this event called New Ways to Be Happier. It's a perennial topic. We all want to find ways to get more out of life, and I'm particularly happy to be joined by a colleague, an expert, and also a dear friend for this session, Vanessa King. Vanessa, thank you so much for making time for us again.
Oh, it's an absolute pleasure. It's just lovely to be with a home audience, as it were.
As many of you will know, all around the world, Vanessa is not only a leading expert in positive psychology and the science of well-being, but has also been at the heart of Action for Happiness ever since we launched now nearly 12 years ago. And she and I have worked together for many years on trying to help people all around the world put this science that's so promising and important into action. So I'm really pleased, Vanessa, that you're going to be taking us through not only some timeless classics, but some new things together at today's event. If you're new to this, welcome to this community event. Action for Happiness is a global movement of people taking action to build a happier and kinder world together. And we're so grateful to all of you, not only for being here, but to all the wonderful volunteers around the world who are helping to spread these ideas, making things happen in your own communities, in local groups and courses. And of course, spreading the 10 keys to happier living that Vanessa was the original author of and brains behind, and has written not only the book that powered the 10 keys, but also other books since, which we may touch on along the way today. Vanessa and I are going to have a chat together about some of these new ways to be happier. You'll have a chance to ask Vanessa some of your own questions, and we'll make it interactive. I know she's got some surprises up her sleeves for us in terms of ways we can all get involved during this conversation. So thank you for being here. Just a quick teaser before I turn to Vanessa and get things started. I know that Vanessa's got an exciting new program and app that's coming out soon, not yet released, but she may say a bit more about that towards the end of this conversation. So do stick around and find out more about how you can get access to that. But Vanessa, as well as saying a big warm welcome and thank you for all of your amazing contributions to Action for Happiness, it would be maybe nice if you could give us a quick reminder of your connection to this topic and why we're here talking about new ways to be happier right now.
Yeah, well, not yeah. As many people know, I studied probably 15 years ago. I studied with Martin Seligman and many of the leaders of the field of positive psychology, and got involved in Action for Happiness just before it launched, because the clue was in the name, action. Well, what actions should we share with people to take? So spent months and months mining the literature, and I always say I kind of read the academic papers so you don't have to. So just extracting the practical wisdoms from that. So, and I've been involved ever since. So both kind of on the kind of sharing the science point of view, but also from the workplace point of view. So doing work that we do in workplaces.
Yes, and if you are here with a professional hat on in any way as a member of this audience, and you'll be interested in finding out more about happiness in the workplace, do get in touch with me or Vanessa afterwards. But Vanessa, I know you're keen to introduce us for today's theme to a topic of psychological sustainability, and that brings up various ideas for me when I hear those words. Would you like to sort of frame that for us and say a bit about what you mean by that?
Well, it's a topic, I mean, I've coined a term I've coined, and I'm finding it's resonating quite well with people, partly because we're in, really uncertain times. There's a lot of, stress and anxiety around for people at the moment. So how do we kind of sustain our well-being for the long run? And also, there's a bit of a pushback I'm finding, say, in organizations and more generally about the word resilience, because that's like, it's about how do we kind of be strong in the face of adversity. And sometimes that's really hard. Whereas for me, thinking about psychological sustainability is a sort of proactive, it's future focused, it's investing for the long term. And it's also not just about me, it's about us, because, as we'll talk about later, we're a social animal. So we need to think about what's good for us as individuals now and in the longer term, but also what's good for others now and in the longer term, and balance our choices and our actions across those kind of four areas, if you like.
I find that balance between little actions we can do right now and the longer term well-being that contributes to you. Fascinating, and I can't wait to get some practical examples of that. But as many know, we love to start these events with a moment of mindfulness and a way of reconnecting with ourselves before we then dive into these topics. I wondered if you might have a new or interesting mindfulness practice or some way of reconnecting with ourselves that you could share with us.
Yeah. Well, this is one I love because I like it because it involves the mind and our breath and our body. So it's really simple. So it's simply moving our head to one side for the count of 10 and moving our head back again to the count of 10 and then to the other side for 10 and back to 10. Now, obviously, only move your head as is comfortable for you. And I suggest we do 2 rounds. One round where I'll count, but my pace, my counting might not match your movement. But the idea is to reach your maximum limit at the count of 10. And then we'll do one round where you do your own. So we up for it? Yep. So let's take a deep breath and maybe close our eyes. So moving our head to one side for 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Breath in and back again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Maybe you do the next side just on your own, counting 10 at your pace. And when you're back to the center, you might want to take a big deep breath in and a nice slow breath out. You might want to open your eyes if they're closed and maybe do a few shoulder rolls and shrugs. Probably need that by this time of the day. And then, so.
Thank you, Vanessa. I always love exercises that reconnect not just with our minds and that sense of being present, but also our bodies. I so often remember how much I'm stuck in my head and sort of a bit disconnected. That really reminded me my neck is actually a little bit stiff. I'm holding some tension. So I feel a bit more connected to both my body and mind now. Thank you.
Brilliant.
Why don't we, just before we dive into some of your new advice and ideas, ask the audience about this idea of psychological sustainability? Maybe you could ask the audience a question that we could then answer in the chat about that. Well, what's the best way to think about this?
Well, when you're thinking about, kind of investing in your well-being for the long term, what's the kind of practice that you do regularly that is something that's going to help you deal with whatever life throws at you sort of further down the line? So
okay, great.
Yeah.
So if you'd like to share a few words in the chat, what's something you do to nurture your well-being that is going to help you in the longer term? So I'll just read a few of these out as they appear. Yoga every day, exercise, nature, journaling, meditation, cycling. Yes, big fan of that. Thank you. Tai Chi, Pilates, reading, certain food, walking my dog, praying, healthy diet, swimming, journaling, movies, and praying, gratitude, fresh air, sitting in silence, socializing, music. I mean, even just in that few that I've read out of this amazing long list flying past, I feel inspired, and I see in that some things that I do myself, but I'm also reminded of others that I don't personally use, but I know many find helpful. How do you feel as you see that list, Vanessa?
It's amazing. There's loads of really interesting. I mean, what's amazing for me is it came up so quickly. So many people are kind of thinking about those things, and they're not nice to have. They're investment in you and your well-being and you being able to do your best and be your best. And also they're an investment in your connections with others, because if we're feeling well, we're actually more likely to, be kinder and whatever to others. And we'll talk a bit more about that later.
Well, let's move into some of these new ways to feel happier. And you and I had a quick pre-chat about some of these earlier, and I'm looking forward to hearing you explain them in more detail. But you started off by talking about something about the richness of our experience in life. And I was really taken by that idea. Do you want to say a bit about what that means and then maybe how we can act on it?
Yeah, well, this is it's a kind of a concept that's been fairly recently articulated by Shige Oishi, who is a really leading psychologist in the US and was actually a student of Ed Diener, who is the kind of original Mr. Happy, the science of happiness person. But he's saying that, so originally when we're thinking about, in positive psychology, originally thinking about what does it mean to live a good life, that there was kind of happiness, so that helps us feel good. There's meaning, which is about doing good, connecting to something bigger than ourselves, contributing to the world. But he was saying, well, actually, there's something that's kind of almost left out, really. I mean, and there may well be other things, but he's saying it's sometimes we do things, we seek new experiences or challenges, or life throws things at us that don't necessarily immediately lead to meaning or to feeling good, but they are adding something. They're helping us sort of grow, if you like. And he says that whilst happiness is about feeling good, meaning is about doing good. Having kind of rich experiences and mining the experiences we have help us kind of broaden our perspective and leads ultimately to wisdom. So a different dimension of the good life. So, I mean, so it could be, and I've been playing with this idea because, as you know, people right here know, my partner was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease about 7 years ago, and that's lots of twists and turns with that and challenges. So, that's not about feeling good. It's about sort of coping, but it's also an experience that's also helping me learn more about, myself and my reaction to it. So, and if we think about, there's lots of changes, there's lots of uncertainty in the world. People are talking about the pace of change. Actually, kind of seeking out kind of new challenges, seeking out things that are curious and interesting, and stepping out of our comfort zone, a little bit, actually helps us adapt to change and be kind of more able to cope with change when they come along the way. And of course, it's fuel for creativity too. So it's an interesting kind of basket of things. So
I feel that there's a couple of points here. Let me see if I've understood you right. So first of all, I really love this idea that there's something that just about novel experiences. And I think we've often felt that trying out new things, being creative, learning new skills is a big contributor to our well-being. And I love that. And obviously I can think of lots of positive ways people can practice that, and some of which were mentioned in the chat, like you might try walking a different way, or a different form of creativity, or learn a new habit or hobby. And yet I think you've said something that I find much more challenging, which is recognizing that a life, even as a happiness expert as you are, the reality of human life is ups and downs and challenge and imperfection. And I have seen the journey you've been on in having a partner with Parkinson's, and how hard that's been for you, and how much you've developed and grown and responded to that. And I see in my own life that sometimes the novelty and the richness of experiences, like, I was not expecting today to go this way. That's a real pain. That's a real difficulty. And yet there's something about the opportunity that those moments bring to grow and learn about ourselves in a deeper way. So is it right to say that when we face challenges, we're not trying to minimize them, but we could maybe see them as opportunities to connect with something deeper or learn in a new way? How do you see that relationship between a difficult time and a happy life, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, of course, we always say happier rather than happy. I mean, I'm particularly strong about that because life inevitably has difficult times as well as happy times. And I think this idea of psychological richness, it's about experiencing things that are different or unusual or novel for us, that have a sort of mixture of emotions, or it might be things that are unexpected. So it could be difficulties and adversities. It could also be just new experiences. So, for example, if you're moving to a new city or a new country, or you are trying something out for the first time. Now, those things often feel comfortable. They don't feel joyful even at the time, but we know, but we actually get something richer from them. They shift and help us grow. And likewise, there's also these unexpected twists and turns that, when it's trying, it's kind of taking the learning, the wisdom from that. I mean, it might be something that we do retrospectively, that we reflect back. In fact, we were going to do a little activity for people, weren't we? An activity to reflect back on a time when you've experienced a challenge, or you've tried something new that was a struggle, or something unexpected happened in life. And think about something that's over now, that you're through, not something that's kind of really pertinent right now. But it's interesting to reflect back on, what did you learn about yourself, and maybe what did you learn about others?
Great. Well, let's do this now. I love that. Let's think about a situation that was difficult in the past, and we're asking people, what's something you learnt, or how did you change almost as a result of that experience?
If it's helpful, I can give a real practical example. Yeah. So part of the journey with Parkinson's that we've been on with John is, a couple of years ago, he had brain surgery. He had deep brain stimulation, which was, really good, because it helps with movement. And it was joyful. It was great. Came back home, and he started to feel the couple of days, 2 days were great. And then he started to feel really tired. And we thought, oh, maybe that's just, he's been in hospital for a couple of weeks, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, so he was resting. And then I heard him get up. This is on a Sunday night. I was cooking downstairs, and then all of a sudden I just heard this crash. And I rushed upstairs, and I found him unconscious with blood pouring out of his head, which was just, oh my God, what am I going to do? I couldn't see where it was coming from. So I rang the ambulance, of course. And whilst I was on the phone going through it, I just opened my front door and just screamed, "Help me." This is about 9 o'clock on a Sunday night. It's pitch black. And I went back upstairs to him, left the front door open, dogs running around. And it was amazing. I mean, just lots of people from my street, some who knew me, some who didn't, came rushing in, said, "Where's that coming from?" It's Vanessa. And all of a sudden, whilst I was following the instructions for on the 999 people in terms of stemming, bleeding and stuff, somebody was collecting all the stuff we needed, because he needed a particular kit. His head, somebody was turning the food off, somebody was looking after the dog. People were moving furniture because it was upstairs, so that the ambulance people came out. And just all these people just came out, and I'm just in the middle. And when she talks about psychological richness, something that shifts our perspective, this was a really big shift for me, because I think it literally, I feel a bit emotional talking about it. It literally, I felt like it opened my heart, because I've always been kind of quite independent and things, but this, when I really needed people stepped in, and they were amazing. It was amazing. So it really shifted my openness to asking for and receiving help. So that's a kind of big pertinent example.
Thank you for sharing that. I found a sort of tingle down my spine as you said that. I mean, it's a very extreme situation you're in there, and I'm so sorry that you went through that. And yet that spontaneous helping from other people, some of whom who didn't know you. And I'm just going to read out a few of the things that people shared in the chat. I learned that nothing in life is permanent. Hard times will eventually pass. Pat says, I learned that others will help me if I ask. And of course, your story, Vanessa, was a lovely example of that. Sarah says the importance of self-care and building this into a daily ritual. Hannah, again, this is a moment, this too shall pass. My own version of this is captured really well in a phrase that my colleague and your friend Alex Nunn shares, where he says, things are either good or good practice.
Yes,
so whenever anything happens, it's either a good thing, or if not, then you can think of it as good practice for your resilience and your learning and so on. So I'm grateful to everyone who shared something in the chat there, but that story captured it beautifully, Vanessa, and it actually bridges rather nicely into a topic that I know you wanted to talk about next. You've mentioned the kindness of strangers, but I know you want to sort of help us expand the way we think about kindness. Do you want to say a bit more about that?
Yeah. And so, we know part of our kind of, our mission at Action for Happiness is happier, kinder together. And of course, kinder and together go together. And there's been a kind of growing body of research that's showing that we know that when we do kind things for others, it can help us feel happier. And when we're happier, we're more likely to do kind things for others. So it's a kind of virtuous circle, a sort of social glue, if you like. But actually, there's a growing body of research that shows that it's also physiologically good for us. So people, when we're kind, it can help boost our immunity. It can lower our blood pressure. Which leads to better heart health. We're less likely to experience anxiety and depression. So there's a biological basis to kindness, being kind. And I've been kind of exploring. There's a really good book that's out called The Biological Basis of Kindness by Immaculata de Viva. And they talk about different types of kindness. And this really helped me think about it. So I've categorized it into 3 kind of areas. One is self-kindness. So of course we have to take care of ourselves to enable us to take care of each other people, sustainably. And there are 2 aspects to that. There's kindness to our body, and some of those examples came out. So, getting enough sleep, exercising, eating the right well. And I think it's really helpful to think about those things as rather than shoulds, and I must eat well, I must get more sleep. But actually, these are acts of kindness to myself. And there's also self-compassion, which is thinking about being an inner coach to ourselves rather than a critic, and not, kind of learning to accept our emotions and not get caught up in them as best we can. And there's also sort of social kindness, and I think this is about social sustainability. So it's our kindness that we display to others, and this could be kind of acts of kindness, spontaneous or intentional acts of kindness or volunteering, but also kindness of communication. Like in our interpersonal relationships, sometimes the kindest thing we can do is simply just giving somebody a moment of our attention. And of course, we're just competing with our phones the whole time, which are taking our attention off others. But that, being able to give somebody a moment of attention is a really powerful thing, as well as, of course, appreciation, encouragement, support, all those things, and listening. And then there's a 3rd type of kindness as well, which sometimes we don't think of as in the same way. It's actually kindness to the planet. And these things are all there's a real interlinking between each of these. So I'm going to pause there because I can talk for England.
Well, it's obviously music to my ears, and I know to many in this community, this connection between our own well-being and caring for others. Something I've heard you say related to this before is the importance of helping people feel that they matter in some way. And I wanted to maybe explore that a little bit. So how do we, for example, use our kind communication to let people know that they mean something to us? And it feels to me that sort of both knowing that we matter through our kind acts, but also helping others feel that they're valued is at the heart of what we all really want in life, which is a lot of the reason we pursue social media affirmation or wear the brands that we want is really we just want to feel valued and that we matter in life. And at the end of the day, that's free and available to all of us if we just let it be so.
Yeah, I mean, this is so this idea of mattering is, again, it's another area that's kind of emerging from positive psychology or the science of well-being, and it's something coined by Isaac Prilatensky, who's a psychologist, and looks at kind of how the psychology of well-being, affects not, just as individuals, but our communities and our sort of social structures. And he's this idea of mattering. He defines it as feeling that I add value and feeling valued. So, and it's interesting that he's found that the best way to feel valid, and we all want to be seen, cared for, feel that we are, that we have value. but the best way to do that is to actually help other people feel like they matter. And it's really simple things. I mean, as simple as learning somebody's name and how to pronounce it correctly and using it, giving people the moment of attention, asking them open questions. So instead of saying, how was your, did you have a good weekend? They say yes or no. You might say, what was the highlight of your weekend? So you learn a bit more about connecting, and they feel kind of that you're interested, and that they're valid, and they matter.
Thank you. Really nicely put. Now, you mentioned another thing that's close to my heart at the end of that piece on kindness, about kindness to the natural world. My background before Action for Happiness was in climate and sustainability work. So I feel a deep affinity for the fact that much of modern life is sadly putting our planet at risk and not nurturing the natural world in the way we would like for future generations. And I know you've got some interesting ideas to help us explore how connected we feel to the natural world. How do we embrace this topic?
Yeah, this is something I kind of dove quite a lot into last year, and I sort of ran a workshop for one of our big clients, and Chris Packham attended the workshop, which was very exciting. Anyway, so there's a little test. It's a test. So I don't know, Mark, if you can share a slide. So this is, I want you to look at this slide and just quickly think about, how do you see yourself in relation to nature? Do you see yourself as side by side, separate, or is there a degree of overlap? And what's the degree of that overlap? So just pick the sort of set of circles that most matches your...
Let me see if I understand this. So if you're feeling very separate from nature, you might be A, and then if you're feeling very much overlapping with nature, then you might be at G, and then you might be a letter in between that. So it looks like we're seeing people, there are some people who say A, very disconnected from nature, and then some that I've seen a couple of F's and G's. I think most people, as I see coming up on the chat here, are somewhere in the C, D, E, F. So sort of there's an overlap, but it's not complete. But it's a really interesting range from A to G, actually. Some people feeling very disconnected from nature, some feeling like it is their very self and their nature. That's fascinating.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Well, this is that was the kind of first test, the basic test that was done to kind of inclusion of self with nature. And what's recent research has been finding, and there's now kind of more varied tests as well, but that's quite nice and simple, that finds that the more that we feel connected to nature or part of nature, the more we are likely to take care of the environment, to do pro-social acts, to do kind acts for the environment, if you like. And the interesting thing is we can increase our sense of connection to nature. And it's not about, well, many of us kind of learn that being in nature is good for us. But it turns out it's not so much about being in nature and it being good for us, but it's about our engagement with nature. So, if we're walking through a local park or taking the dog out somewhere, along the riverside or whatever, and we're in our head worrying about things, or we're on our phone the whole time, we're in nature, but we're actually not gaining much benefit from it. Whereas if we are actively, noticing nature's mindful practice, it could be, noticing the colors, listening to the birds, the smells, noticing, how things are changing. It could be, it might be more, we're gardening, or we're bird watching, or whatever it is, helping clean up rivers, whatever it is. Those active engagements of nature are what makes nature the best for our well-being. We get the most out of nature for our well-being, and we cultivate our sense of nature connectedness. So which is good for builds a psychological well-being, and that makes us more likely to take care of it, be kind to the environment. And so there's a two-way thing. If we're kind of engaging in kind behaviors to the environment, that can boost our psychological well-being, and vice versa. So what I'm really excited about this is a real we're starting to see how positive psychology and the science of well-being is evolving now from just the individual, but through to actually how do we create a better world, really. So, and interestingly, I should say that the research, it does, when they were looking studies looking at nature connectedness and finding the benefits, we didn't need to be living in kind of the countryside or access to the countryside. It applies just as much to people in urban environments. But it's about this. There's a really lovely paper called Moments, Not Minutes. It's the quality of our time in nature, not the amount of time.
Thank you. I feel a real strong sense of connection to that as a lover of the natural world, and also recognizing that when I jump on my bike to cycle to work or wherever, that there's something that feels different as I go through the park, and probably does, as you say, not only make me feel better, but makes me feel more, reminds me of how much I care about and value the natural world. And I'd just like to shout out to Anna, who in the chat, when everyone else was saying I'm an A, I'm a B, I'm a G, she said, I'm the queen of the jungle, which made me laugh. So thank you for that.
There's a really lovely variant of the 3 good things exercise, which everybody, I'm sure most people here are familiar, but it's a classic positive psychology thing. Each night, write down 3 things you're grateful for. And you can do a variant of that. You could say 3 things I've enjoyed about nature today. So you could play around with that. It just makes you actively think about nature as you're out and about during your day, so that you can kind of reflect back on it, which is a really nice way to do it. And there's also, actually going back to our thing about sort of social sustainability and our social kindness, and this idea of, I mean, it would be interesting to know whether people here find it easier to offer help than they do to ask for help. Be interested to know whether is it easier to offer help, to give help, to help others, than it is to ask for help.
So let's just see that in the chat. Offer or ask? I'm seeing at the moment a lot more offering than asking, and that is sort of what I expected. There's something that we feel that asking is an admission of that we can't cope, or that we're maybe putting a burden on someone else. And I found, as I've said on one of these events before, that when I remembered, as you were saying to us earlier, that letting someone help me is actually a form of kindness, insofar as they then get the buzz of being kind to others, allowed me to make more permission for, like, it's okay to say help. And of course, as you reminded us in that example, when we really are in need and we just run out of the front of our house and shout, people are good and people will generally come to us. So I find that really inspiring.
It is. I mean, and it's and this is another variant of the 3 good things that we can do. So when we, it's one of those ideas that when we see other people help, kindness has a ripple effect out. When we see other people are kind to us, we're more likely to be kind to others. And when people see acts of kindness, they're more likely to be kind to others. So there is this kind of ripple effect out, which, there's kind of evolutionary theories for. But another variant of this 3 good things activity that I really like is, when you're writing down your 3 good things for the day, you could actually maybe spend a moment or 2 reflecting or writing about how did other people contribute to that. So even like, I really enjoyed a coffee, it could be that actually the barista was really friendly. Somebody had made the place really clean. So, even down to thinking about who picked the coffee beans and things, that, you can actually start to think about how other people contribute to your well-being, which then makes you feel more interconnected, which is good for your well-being, and it makes you more likely to be kind. So that's a kind of fun way to kind of play with the 3 good things idea that you could experiment with.
I really like that. It reminds me of a famous email that Steve Jobs, the legendary Apple founder, once sent to himself, I think. And he was a reminder, and you think of we tend to think of him as someone who's quite full of his own ideas, but he wrote the following: I grow little of the food I eat, and the little that I do grow, I did not breed the seeds. I do not make any of my own clothing. I speak a language I did not invent. I did not discover the mathematics I use. I'm protected by freedoms and laws that I did not conceive of or legislate. I'm moved by music I did not create myself. When I needed medical attention, I was helpless to help myself. I did not invent the transistor, the microprocessor, or most of the technology I work with. I love and admire my species, living and dead, and I'm totally dependent on them for my life and well-being. So that was there's someone we think of as like a doer, an achiever, and even he recognized that we are all completely interdependent on, as you say, the person who's helped us in the shop, the supply chain of from farm to plate. It's amazing just to think about how many people help us every day.
Yeah, that we don't think, and that we, and even sometimes if we're feeling lonely or isolated, that actually thinking about those things, it makes us realize we're part of one big web. And, and I mean, my first degree was psychology and biology. So I'm very interested in how these things, why do these things evolve? Why do these biological mechanisms and psychological mechanisms evolve? And it's because we're a social species. We evolved to live in groups. So of course these mechanisms are there because we need each other. And I think it's, so that was something that I find really powerful, actually. I love that quote from Steve Jobs.
Yeah, well, maybe we'll share that in the follow-up email. Now, in a moment, we will come to questions. So if you've got questions for Vanessa, please do put them in the Q&A rather than the chat, because it's easier to find them. And if you see a question you like, please vote it up. But Vanessa, I think we've talked about lots of lovely, as ever, asset-focused things that we can do. And you and I both know, and we were talking about this just yesterday, how much uncertainty there is in the world right now. How many people are dealing with really serious issues, cost of living and financial worries, health issues, uncertainty, unemployment. There's an increasing number of people off work due to ill health, both mental and physical, and a lot of loneliness, uncertainty, polarization, worries, you name it. There was a sense that life is changing and there are difficult things that we feel a bit overwhelmed by. I keep coming across people who just say they feel a bit like they're worried and can't cope with it all. What can we say about change and uncertainty and how we can use some of that richness of experience you were talking about, but how can we maybe find ways to cope better with life's daily challenges?
Well, I mean, firstly, I think it's really important. So there is a lot of change around and uncertainty at the moment, and it's completely normal to find that difficult. I mean, when I work with organizations, I use a framework that I call the 5 C's, which is based on kind of core psychological needs, really, that we all have for both well-being and motivation. And that's a sense of control, a sense of competence, a sense of connection, a constructive emotional environment, and a sense of contribution and meaning. Now, each one of those, when we face change and uncertainty, maybe changes going on at work or around in the world around us, each one of those is threatened. We feel, we don't feel quite as in control, and we don't quite know what to do. That threatens our sense of competence. There's a negative emotional environment. Etc., etc. But those core psychological needs that can be threatened by change. But those 5 C's also give us clues into what can we do, what's within our gift, if you like, that helps us cope in the situation. So for example, whilst we might not be able to control everything that's going on in the world, what's one small thing we can do, and what's one small thing that we can influence? And this, so these are kind of, I'm going to say, almost 5 C's to psychological sustainability, really.
Vanessa, sorry to hold that thought, but just because people are asking in the chat to recap on the 5 C's. So control, you mentioned that's about sort of feeling that you have some kind of choice and autonomy in how you do things. Competence, sort of feeling that you have efficacy, you can get something done, you can tick things off, you get that sort of dopamine achievement, accomplishment. Connection is about relationships. We've talked a lot about that. And then you said constructive emotional environment. Do you want to say a bit more about that one?
I would say it's a net positive, because this is not about, when change and uncertainty and difficult things happening in the world, we can't just be kind of happy clappy. We can kind of seek the positives, but also accept the difficult emotions as well, but not get sucked into them. And it's so easy to do that on things like social media or in the workplace or whatever. there's lots of moaning and groaning, and it's just like, take ourselves away from that, just dip into it, know that there are difficulties out there, and find things that we can move forward in, in a more constructive emotional way. And then
I really like that, the sense that all emotions are valid, and that includes the difficult ones as well as the ones we might find pleasant, and yet we can still find ways to not get knocked off course by the difficult emotions we're experiencing. But then the fifth one you mentioned, was it contribution? You said
contribution, its meaning. It's because it's the framework I kind of put together, which is based in, it's actually in the Creating the World Want to Live in book, but it's it's the 5 C's. So contribution, meaning, and finding, knowing our why, knowing how we connect to something bigger, how we can make a difference to the world around us in some shape or form.
So I wonder if we could maybe turn back to the audience and do something using these insights, maybe the 5 C's, but so we talked earlier about a challenge that happened in the past and something you learned. I wonder if people might want to bring to mind something that they're dealing with right now. Not a huge thing, because I don't want to recognize we're in a webinar here. We can't support you in a one-to-one psychological sense if you've got real trauma in your life right now, but something you're working with wherever you are in the world right now. Maybe we could use what Vanessa shared here to try and bring to mind what's something that we can potentially do to deal more positively with a challenge right now. Is there a way we can, for example, use one of these? Can we take action to feel more in control, to reach out, be more connected with someone, to find ways to deal with the difficult feelings that are coming up, to see the way in which it links us to a greater meaning, link ourselves to the natural world, any of these other ideas?
Yeah. Well, even going back to the first thing we did in the chat, which I think the second thing actually, when we've been through a difficulty, a challenge, or a change before, what did we learn? And how could that help us right now? That's the psychological richness. That's the kind of richness of experience. How are we mining the wisdom of that experience
Lovely.
to face the challenges of the future?
So Joan says in the chat, being present. Vicky says, recognizing that I have more control. Gary says, being open and curious to change rather than resisting it. Caroline says, walking in nature. Grace, just recognizing that I can cope. Justine, that nothing is permanent. Thank you, folks. I really like how you're personalizing what we've talked about today and putting it into practice. Vanessa, before we come to the questions, just briefly, I teased it at the start, but you've got this exciting new program, which will be in an app form coming out soon, which takes the 10 keys to happier living and lots of these insights and many more, and tries to make it available to a broader audience in a way they can learn. What would you like to say? What's it called, first of all?
It's called How to Be Happier, and it's the first course on a new platform called Illume. So really excited to kind of be partnering with Action Happiness and Illume on this to take these ideas out more widely. And it's 28 sessions that take wisdom from the science, but importantly help people not just know about it, but put it into practice, very much at the Action for Happiness heart, and then reflect on it, get the insights from that, and then it supports you in terms of integrating that into your daily life. So it's kind of wisdom, practice, insight, and integration with there's lots of kind of tools and things on the Illume platform that can help people. So meditations, reflections, heart rate variability apps that can really help people build the habits for psychological sustainability, if you like, and with some of these concepts that we've covered tonight, these newer concepts also mentioned in the course. So very excited about that.
Yeah, thank you. I've had a chance to see this and try it out, and it's beautifully designed. And so all of you who are here today, you'll be the first to hear about this when it's ready, and we'll make sure we send a follow-up. Vanessa, let's move to questions. Hannah's asked a really pertinent and difficult, I think, question. How do you cope with things that are so difficult that even when that moment passes, you still need to heal and move forward? For example, dealing with a great loss or something else that's been really sort of substantial. She mentions a sort of a moral injury or something that really lingers, if you like. How do we respond constructively to that sort of situation?
I mean, there's a few things come to mind. Is one is time sometimes heals. It's called psychological immunity. It doesn't always. Secondly is you don't go these things alone. So are there friends that are wise friends that you can share things with, or support that you can get from a therapist or counselor? And what can you, what is this something you can take away? I was talking to somebody at the weekend and I love that she told me a practice that she does, which I really like. She said, when things go really wrong for me, and I'm smarting or whatever, she said, I rewrite them, I write a movie, but I change the ending. And so she uses a lot of writing through that. And I thought that's a really nice thing. It's not going to change the situation, but it kind of might make you think about how you could move forward from it. And there's also, there's a lot around about forgiveness as well. That is, there are I suggest looking up practices around forgiveness.
Yes, I'm still hoping one day we might host Fred Luskin, who I always find really moving on forgiveness. But this idea that forgiving a past wrong isn't condoning the behavior or even saying that it was okay, but it's just sort of being able to say that happened and I'm going to let it go. And I'm reminded of that, I think often attributed to the Buddha phrase of holding on to past anger is like holding a hot coal with the intention of throwing it at the other person. You're the one that gets burned. And there's something about just being able to release what we're holding on to. And actually that links to Alison's question. She says, how can we stop the rethinking or overthinking about things that haven't gone well or that are unpleasant? And I think so many of us get stuck in these loops of replaying difficult situations and perhaps berating ourselves. I often am amazed at how harshly we speak to ourselves in our heads. Any tips on that?
Yeah, I mean, there's a few practices come to mind. I mean, firstly, well done on recognizing that you're kind of overthinking and rethinking and going through these replays. And secondly, is kind of, can you find a way to get you out of your head? It could be in your body, in your grounding. It could be physical activity. It could be, there's a lovely practice, which is a Julia Samuels practice, which I'm sure I've talked about on one of these webinars before, where you kind of recognize this thing that's going on in your head. As if it's, you think about it happening on the screen in front of you, on your personal screen. And then you pick up the remote control and you change it to a time when you were feeling, happier or better, a time when you felt your best. And you really mine that for, what were you doing? How are you feeling? What was the situation? And then you can pick up the remote control and turn that off and get on with whatever you need to get on with. But it's just getting yourself out of that rumination. Now, there's Albert Ellis, who's the father of, or grandfather of, cognitive behavioral therapy, says we're very good at disturbing ourselves with this kind of, our imagination on overdrive, catastrophizing, or stuck in those loops, that tricks that we can get to get ourselves out of our head.
You reminded me of a Mark Twain quote, which I'm going to mangle, but it's something like, I've been through lots and I've been worried about so many things in my life, a few of which actually happened, or something like that, that we trauma ourselves a lot more than the reality of what we're dealing with. But
this is when I come back to being kind to ourselves. And what we don't realize is when we've got all these thoughts, these difficult thoughts, things that we don't, many of them are natural, but it is triggering the threat system in our primitive emotional brain for ourselves. So it's kind of, how do we kind of get ourselves out of that? Finding ways to get ourselves out of that, to calm down, to enable us to have more perspective and think about the learning, I guess.
Do please keep adding questions and voting on other people's. Kaori has made a really good connection between what we've been talking about and physical pain. So when we're in physical pain, for example, from an injury or illness, how can you stay happy and in a positive mindset, especially if you live alone or the loved ones are far away? And I'd just like to say, well, I'm sorry if that's what you're dealing with right now. I've had periods of extreme sort of chronic pain that's been debilitating to the point of having no sense of happiness. It's really difficult to be feeling in physical pain. And yet, I mean, in my case, I found some ways to cope. But Vanessa, in general, what do you think about this connection between our mental and physical well-being generally?
A couple of things come to mind. One is, you know, it's normal not to be full of the joys of spring if you've got a lot of pain, but it doesn't mean to say you can't find small joys, and look actively look for those joys. The second thing is mindfulness-based stress reduction. That 8-week program was originally developed for people with chronic pain, and it was shown, sort of mindfulness practices were shown to help reduce people's experience of pain. So it might be worth checking out whether there's a mindfulness course, a mindfulness program that you could take with others that could help. So, but it's accepting that you are in pain and that's difficult, and looking for the joys. Somebody I write about in the List Happy book, who's in a very difficult personal situation, sort of multiple carer, she says, I kind of, however difficult my life gets in one direction, I try and find a joy in another direction, be it hyacinths growing on her window ledge, whatever. But it's not taking away from the pain, but it's finding some limits.
Thank you. And I'm glad you mentioned mindfulness in connection with pain. The thing that changed my life with my chronic back pain was, instead of pushing the pain away, which actually made it worse, being able to be present with the pain and just notice that it changes, and it sometimes it's unbearable and sometimes it's not so much. And actually, when I was able to be present with the pain and sort of almost tune into it rather than blocking it out, it became weirdly less debilitating and sort of naturally led to more healing. Now, I'm not suggesting the mind can heal the body in some mystical way, but there is something about our relationship to our pain is something that we can control more than we realize, I think.
Yeah, and I wonder if not becoming the pain, knowing that you were still despite the pain, is a kind of interesting thought. But yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, thank you. Let's move on. Anne's asked, you were talking a lot about kindness. She says simply, how do you deal with people being unkind?
If people are unkind to you, then I think sometimes it's calling it out. I mean, it's either, is it worth calling it out, or is it something to let go, or is it calling out and saying, you realize when, this is, I find non-violent communication quite helpful here. So you say, actually, when you spoke to me like that, facts, not emotional, just facts, it made me feel, so nobody can argue with your feel. And I'd really appreciate it if, and you ask something of them, if you could be a little bit more aware of your tone of voice or whatever next time we have a conversation. What's your request? I mean, they may push back or whatever, but it's the facts, unemotional, which is hard to do, and then how it made me feel, how it makes you feel, and your request of them. So I need to feel respected. Therefore, please, can you use a softer tone of voice, whatever.
I'm really glad you mentioned that. And if anyone wants to look up nonviolent communication, Marshall Rosenberg's work, it's super powerful. In fact, I've been writing about this today. As some of you will know, I'm writing my first book at the moment about a lot of these topics. And one of the things I was reminded of is what you've just given an example of there, Vanessa, is communicating our needs. You're sort of saying, here's the fact and here's the feeling, but my need is like, I would really appreciate it if you could say that differently or something. The other thing that I think answers this question from Anna slightly is recognizing that the other person has needs that we sometimes can't see. So their unkind behavior probably says more about what they're dealing with than it does about us. They aren't necessarily intending to be unkind. They're just they're seeing the world differently. They're in a particular perspective. Now, again, it's not to condone unkindness, but sometimes I need to recognize that when someone is reacting in a difficult way and saying tough stuff to me, I don't need to take it personally and try and fix it. I just need to notice this person's having a tough time right now. I wonder if I can tune into what's going on for them and help with that, rather than being offended that they've been a bit short or rude. So there's something compassionate about the way we deal with unkindness in a way.
Yeah, I mean, an act of kindness is giving people the benefit of the doubt, and sometimes people are just having a bad day, and it could actually be saying, oh, I felt this, but I just wonder if, if it's, if you're having a tough time or whatever at the moment, and just, ask them about it, or, or like you say, just give them the benefit and move on. It depends whether it's a frequent occurrence or
Thank you. I love these questions. It's such a wise audience, and I wish we had time to do all of them. I will come to this one because, you're linked to the science of well-being, and this question from Marcus is a fantastic one. I think I saw in a chat earlier as well, in that it links to our brain chemistry. I think I know a little bit about some of these, but I'd appreciate your perspective as well, Vanessa. And then we'll do a little close and wrap up. To what extent, Marcus asks, is it important to understand our brain chemistry, the hormones like endorphins and dopamine and serotonin and oxytocin? And what can we do to activate their release to make us feel better? So I've got some thoughts on that, but would love to hear anything that comes up for you.
I mean, I think some people love knowing the science and some people don't. You don't need to know that. I mean, you know that social connection, when we share, for example, a pleasant moment with another person, we start to produce oxytocin that calms us down, further attunes us to others, so make us more likely to have more positive emotions. But do you need to know about oxytocin for that? No. You need, knowing that social connection is good for our well-being and boosts our happiness is enough for some people. So I think if it's your interest, then it's find out more. It's great. I mean, I like the science, but you actually don't need to get into the technical detail if that's not your bag, really. So
yeah, thank you. I agree with that. I mean, just in summary, I was writing about this the other day. Dopamine is the one that comes to do with like rewards, like when you complete a task. So you could get that from a little bit of self-care or celebrating a little win. Oxytocin is the one that comes, it's the kind of sometimes called the love hormone. It comes from sort of, petting an animal or holding hands or hugging a loved one. Serotonin sort of like, I guess it's the sort of mood stabilizer, sometimes might come from meditation or being in nature or sunlight. And then endorphins, which I love, comes from, I mean, particularly from exercise, but also from laughing and other things. And it's a sort of painkiller and also reward almost for having been active. So as you say, we don't need to know that because we can just benefit from, getting stuff done and being affectionate and getting outdoors and exercising. And yet I quite like knowing that this is going on in our brains as well.
Well, I think what's important is that our biology and our mind states are connected. I mean, that's I think so. What we're doing, our actions, our interactions affect, have an impact on our biology, which then affects how we feel. So it's all wound up. So, but it's whatever you if it's an area of interest, then learn more about it. If not, don't. So just enjoy the actions. Yeah.
Well, this has been a huge area of interest for me, listening to you and being with you today, Vanessa, and I'm so grateful to everyone in the community for participating. Before I hand back to you for a final word, let's just very briefly do what we call the checkout with Action for Happiness. So wherever you are in the world, just take a breath. Just notice how you're feeling right now. We've spent this time together. We've learned from Vanessa. And maybe bring to mind something you appreciate from this session, particularly something that struck you, that you might take away, something that you can put into practice, maybe an idea that came up for you, something Vanessa said, maybe an idea you saw in the chat. And then holding that sense of appreciation, the final step of the checkout, let's just send out some warm wishes beyond this group, beyond this session, to many others around the world who are dealing with a lot right now, people who particularly could do with learning more about these skills that we've all had the chance to experience together today, and to bring that spirit of kindness that Vanessa mentioned to us out into the way that we are, not just with ourselves, but with others in our families, our communities, and the world around us. And let's just come back for one final moment. Vanessa, so grateful for your expertise and your insight. Would you like to wrap up and sort of summarize or maybe leave us with a final thought?
Yeah, I would say, what ways can you make a difference to others in the world around you that will support your psychological sustainability, for the longer run? And I think it's this idea that it's not just short term, it's longer term, and it's not just me, it's we or us, so we all make a difference to each other. So does that make sense?
Beautifully put. Happier, kinder together, as
yes.
we say, with Action for Happiness. Thank you all for being part of this, the global community, for making time for this together. And particularly, Vanessa, thank you for all of your wisdom, for all of the huge generosity you've brought to sharing this for many years with so many of us, and all the lives that you've touched and helped. And I look forward to letting everyone know more about this exciting program and app once that becomes available. And we will share the video from this session as a follow-up to everyone who's participated and signed up tomorrow. So thank you all. And Vanessa, particularly, thanks so much again.
Thank you. It's an absolute pleasure. Okay. Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Bye.